sharing started. But thank you all for joining. I hope all of you are Satama today as we are kicking off Paryushan for the first day today. Thank you, Garima, for thinking about me to do this presentation. So my name is Ankit, and I am the West Regional Coordinator this year at YJA. And this is a presentation of some research I did when I was in college. So from Jainism to secular context, the path to liberation. It's a loaded thing, so hopefully by the end of my presentation, you'll understand it maybe a little bit more. So to start, some definitions. So liberation has a million meanings. In Jainism, we obviously likely are to know that liberation can be translated to the ultimate goal of moksha and, freeing from the cycle of birth and death. And you do that by removing your karma. And now liberation, when it comes to social justice context, it can be used as like a political term. And it's really the attainment of equal freedoms and removal of any oppression that exists in a society. And so those are the liberation again, as it has multiple definitions. They mean very different things as Jains. We define it very differently from what some activists or political scholars define the idea of liberation. So as I said, this is some research I was able to look up, and the ones that are underlined are the ones I will talk through today, and I guess the Jain view on it and this like social justice view on it and how there's similarities and differences. So the first idea is war. So in Jainism, there are many, obviously, our first principle is like ahimsa paramo dharma, but there are scriptures as well that the Tattvartha Sutra also does cover this idea of unlimited nonviolence, tolerance, and reverence for life, a big respect for all living beings. Paryushan is a great example of that as well. And so war is seen as a hindrance to reaching the idea of moksha because of the violence that does take place in that. When we look at a social justice view, there are, even right now as we're living in 2024, we are seeing people being very against war. There are countless amounts of life that are shed, whether that's innocent civilians, people from military, soldiers, etc. And so there are countless wars that have happened in just the last decade or two that have taken so many innocent lives. And so that in itself is a big similarity in how this idea of violence is very, looked to avoid in Jainism as well as social justice movements. Now, the next idea is the idea of protest and civil disobedience. So in Jainism, this picture that you're seeing, if you may know, there are many practices, one being Salekna that that Jains believe in, that in India, for example, the government has tried attempts to outlaw them or, restrict them. And so protest has been used as a mechanism to elevate different perspectives and views, and so Jain communities have taken part in civil disobedience demonstrations to respond to these sort of actions in India. And when we look at here in America, but also just in a general social justice view, I mean, if you've gone to school in the US, you're more likely than not to have heard about Dr. King and the work that he's done around civil disobedience and the civil rights movement to liberate people of color, African Americans more specifically, at a time where they were treated as less than. And so peaceful demonstrations are really a bedrock of any movement, but it's also enshrined in, for example, our US Constitution that you have a right to protest in this country. Now, looking at the economic justice view, or the economic justice aspect of it, so the historical Mahavira, or as documented in historical accounts, but for us, as we also know, Mahavir Bhagwan was somebody who was a champion for equality and equity. And one thing that gained him popularity in India, which even today is still very prominent there, is the caste system. And Mahavir Bhagwan, as we may have learned it from our scriptures, but also as history documents him to be, he grew out of the rejection. He strongly rejected the caste system and the inequities and inequalities that are caused by those. And even from scripture, there are different quotations. This is one from one scripture about how contributing to economic injustice does affect your path to liberation and can limit your access to reaching moksha. And obviously, economic justice has its own, when there's economic inequality, that's why we see a lot of social justice movements as well. So looking at these, the obvious difference that exists is the ultimate idea of liberation, but the path, as you may have seen, is quite similar in some of the similar views that are seen between Jain practices and things that we are taught as Jains and we practice as Jains, and things that people try to employ when they are trying to, fight for social justice in any society. So, Michhami Dukkadam, if anything that I talked about may have offended you or have been misinterpreted, and I'm also happy to take any questions that anyone may have.